Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, if you've been thinking about, leaping into something new, maybe you're contemplating writing a book. Maybe you've been thinking about for ever to submit a TEDx talk, or maybe you're thinking about making a whole career shift that would massively change everything, as if you were proverbial shaking your Etch-a-Sketch of life. If that's you, today's episode is specifically for you. And our special guest today is author Matthew Dicks. He's the author of his latest book, Someday is Today, which is 22 simple, actionable ways to propel your creative life. He's also wrote, 9 other books as well. He's a best-selling novelist, a nationally recognized storyteller, and an award-winning elementary school teacher that teaches storytelling and communications at universities, corporate workplaces, and community organizations all across the U.S. He's also the co-host of Speak Up Storytelling podcast. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Matthew Dicks. Hey, Matthew.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
You have a lovely podcast voice as well. So this is a delight for all the people listening.
You're very kind.
So this is your latest book, Someday is Today. And, in it, very early on, you talk about how the word someday is one of your least favorite words in the English language. So why is that, and what can we replace it with instead?
Sure. So someday I always think is a trap. It is the opportunity for people to put off something that they really should be doing right now. It is sort of that fool's dream that there will always be a tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And then what happens to people is either they reach an age where those tomorrows are harder to find, or sadly, I think a lot of people keep saying someday until one day they're no longer here. Mm-hmm. And I think the tragedy of that is so many people live lives where they don't chase their dreams. And so my book is called Someday is Today because truly, I believe that the best day for you to begin chasing that dream of yours, whether it is starting a garden in your backyard or launching a business or anything in between, I just think you need to start doing it now.
Yeah. And, I feel like when you boil down every emotion, every feeling in the universe, you can kind of boil it down to 2 primary categories in my mind. It's either love or fear, right? And that pesky thing of fear keeps us stuck in this comfort zone bubble. What are your thoughts there?
I think that so often people believe that in order to do something, in order to chase that dream, they need to sort of come out of the gate with perfection, that whatever they produce must be excellent right off the bat. And, in my book, I talk about how important it is to accept the fact that we're going to make lots of terrible things. And it's the journey of making terrible things that will ultimately result in something of value and of meaning. But if we're not willing to be brave enough to put our worst self out there, I think that's worse than putting nothing out there. And so we have to stumble in order to run, and we have to not be afraid of putting things into the world that other people might not think are extraordinary immediately.
Yeah, and I can resonate with that. I mean, we've all read the Malcolm Gladwell book, 10,000 Hours, right? It takes 10,000 hours to command mastery over a thing, whether it's riding a unicycle or being a podcaster. It doesn't matter. You need to put the time in to develop those skills and repetition over time. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I'm talking about actually doing it, because a lot of the creators I work with, they sort of do a lot of thinking, and they believe that the thinking that they're doing is actually some kind of productive endeavor, when really it's just procrastinating and stalling. And so when I hear someone working on a screenplay and they're sort of parceling out in their head and trying to figure out where it's going to go, I say, well, there are keys and you have fingers. So why don't you begin doing that? Just get some words on the page. If you know what the ending of your movie is, write the ending of your movie rather than the beginning. But make productive steps forward rather than sitting around and thinking about what that thing might look like someday. I just think that it's only through action that we can actually begin to learn to become better creators of whatever we're trying to do.
Yeah, and so let's break that down in specific terms for all the writers and wannabe writers that are listening right now. I mean, when they get there and they're at their desk and they're like, I got nothing. Like, what advice would you give them practically when they're faced with writer's block? What works for you?
Well, for me, I've never really suffered from writer's block because whenever I'm stuck on one thing and I'm really stuck on it, all I do is I begin something else. And so, I have a novel that's under contract and it's supposed to be done, but I can't stare at a screen all day if I'm stuck in a spot that I don't know where to go with. So when I'm stuck there, I instead say, I'm going to go write a letter to one of my old teachers, or I'm going to write a poem, or I'm going to write a blog post, or I'm going to write a news story or start that secret novel I'm not telling anyone about because I'm afraid to not end up working in any way. As long as you're working as a writer, as long as you're assembling sentences in some order, you're becoming a better writer and you're producing something. And so rather than getting stuck on one thing, we have to allow ourselves as creative people to have a field of things that we're working on at all times. And that way you can't help but be productive.
And you know what it makes me think of? Raise your hand if this is you out there listening right now. How many times have we bought some sort of online course or some program because we're like, oh, I need to get these skills before I start doing X, Y, Z, right? Like, and that's just another, maybe to a certain extent, yes, you do need some tangible skills, but mostly that's procrastination, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's probably the desire for a magic pill, which most people want as well. They really want to sort of be offered something that will be the cure-all and allow them to be the brilliant person that they know they are inside, which they are inside, but it requires a lot of work and a lot of effort and making terrible things before you get to make something great.
I made loads of terrible things in my business. Loads. And that's the thing is that we see people's stuff either in a podcast or on Instagram or whatever, and you go, oh, look how perfect and amazing is those video editing skills, the vocalization, the blah, 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 blah. It comes from repetition. So in your book, let's shift gears a little. You talk about the 100-year-old plan. What does that mean? Because maybe that could help us here.
Sure. It's really about decision making. When I was 22 years old, I was involved in a really terrible armed robbery. And there was a moment during that robbery when there was a gun placed to my head and a man started counting back from 3. And he told me when he reached 1, he was going to kill me. And I 100% believed in that moment that I was at the end of my life. And the astounding thing about that moment for me was that I didn't have fear or anger or even sadness. The only feeling I felt in that moment was regret. That I was 22 years old and I had yet to even begin chasing the dreams that I had in my heart and mind. And so obviously I survived. There was no bullet in the gun when they pulled that trigger, and it took a long time for me to get past it. But, in a weird and terrible way, there was a gift involved with it because I understood with absolute clarity what it feels like to be at the end of your life and regret having lived the way you lived. And so the 100-year-old plan is the idea that if I make choices for myself today in the version I am today, I'm probably choosing golf and cheeseburgers. That's, 1 and 2 for me all the time. But that's not going to lead to a fulfilling life. It's the idea that we can't make decisions always based upon what we want in the moment because it's not a good long-term view. So what I do is I imagine a 100-year-old version of me, someone lying in his deathbed far in the future, the person I will one day be. And I ask that person, I say, I've got 2 hours ahead of me. How should I spend them? And again, if I asked myself here, I'd get a cheeseburger and go play golf. But the 100-year-old version of me says, listen, golf is great and cheeseburgers are good, but you actually have a book you want to write. Yeah. And your son asked you to wrestle. And you have a cat that's only going to live 12 to 18 years. So why don't you go pet that cat? Because that cat's not going to be around as long as you think it's going to be around. And your wife is sitting on the patio and she's reading, and she would love it if you sat next to her and read with her. All of those things. He always offers me the wisdom that I need in order to make sure I'm making the right decisions right now, as opposed to the wrong decisions or what tragically people do, not making any decisions at all and just allowing the forces of the universe to push me in a direction rather than me making an intentional choice about the direction I'm going in.
It's so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing all of that, because I think a lot of times we get stuck either in the pleasures and gluttony of now, the golf and the cheeseburgers, or we get stuck in the inner child work. We let the 8-year-old version of us make decisions and drive the bus and keep us from doing things that we really in our deep soul want to accomplish but are too afraid to do. And I just love the reframe of it, that the 100-year-old version of you sits inside you now, that deep inner knowing and wisdom, and that you can call upon them just as easily as the 8-year-old. And, when you're looking at your board of advisors, who are you gaining your advice from, right?
Right. Yeah, I always tell people you really have to sort of imagine that person in a real way. And in the book, I actually recommend you either drawing that person or choosing that person from a magazine and sort of pasting them somewhere. I just had a woman email me today, and she said that her 100-year-old version is Rose from Titanic. And she printed a bunch of pictures of Rose from Titanic and put them all over the house to remind her that that is the person she's going to use when looking for the wisdom of how to spend this day.
I love that. And I really hope that whoever is listening to us right now, wherever you are in the world, take a moment, press pause right now, and just drop into that. Because if that were true, which I believe it is, then how does that change your perspective today? I mean, in this present moment right here.
Yeah. I'll tell you that the 100-year-old version of me never suggests that I binge a Netflix television show and never suggests that I doom scroll on my phone, right? These are not things that my 100-year-old version thinks I should be spending any time doing. And frankly, there will be a time maybe in my life when binging Netflix is appropriate. It is when people stop asking me to do things and I'm not able to be as physically capable as I am today. There might be a time in the future where Netflix is waiting for me, but today there's better things in my life.
Which that is a perfect segue into my next question, because I felt as I read your book and I really loved it. Thank you so much for sharing it with me. I feel like the first half of the book entirely is all about time and the concept of time. So why do you spend so much time on talking about time, and why we really need to adjust our viewpoints on it in order to take that leap into something new?
Well, so often the excuse that people make for not doing the thing they want to do is that they don't have the time. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when I'm working with a client and we drill down into how they're actually spending their time, we discover that people have enormous amounts of time. And what is really happening in their life is they're dithering it away. Mm-hmm. One of my friends read the book and she said one of the most life-changing things from the book for her was she always framed every activity in 30-minute or 60-minute increments, which means she discovered that there were all these like 9 minutes and 4 minutes and 11-minute periods throughout the day where she was essentially not doing anything because she couldn't imagine, well, what can I accomplish in 11 minutes or what can I get done in 4 minutes? But once you start to fill those times, you recognize those opportunities and you do things that are productive, either creatively or maybe you just do something that needs to be done so that you can get on to the next creative thing. That can really help you. The other reframe she had that I loved, which was she used to think of chores as you do the whole chore or you do none of the chore. And I talk about like, I'll empty half the dishwasher. I'll fold half the load of laundry. Mm-hmm. I will do half of a task because that means I don't have to do the other half of the task later on. And so when we start thinking about time and using it wisely as our most precious commodity, suddenly we will find ourselves with plenty of time to do the things we want to do.
And that makes me think of a blog that I absolutely love and adore that came out about maybe 10 years ago or so called Unf Your Habitat. Have you stumbled upon these guys?
No.
So funny, so crass, so delicious and wonderful. I'll put the link in the show notes. By the way, everything we talk about today is in the show notes, thesimplifierspodcast.com. But Unf Your Habitat, their strict core value is set a 20-minute timer and see what you can actually get done. Just focus on your desk, focus on the kitchen, 20 minutes, and that's it. Because I think we overcomplicate it in our brain of like, oh, this is a big task. Well, I better go do this little thing over here, and then I'll do this little thing. It's like, no, just focus, unf it, move on, right?
Yeah, in my book, one of the recommendations I make, it's something I have for myself, is make a list of all the things you can do in 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Because our life is filled with little 10-minute black holes, my wife calls them, these little times that I make use of. And if you have a list in your mind of what I can accomplish in 10 minutes, then when you have those moments, you're not going to be paralyzed wondering what I should do, because you'll just wonder which one of the multitude of things that I can do should I do right now, which is a much better problem to have. So you really have to be cognizant of what needs to be done, what you're capable of doing, and how getting those things done will help you get to the things that matter eventually.
Yeah, and be scrupulous about eliminating the time sucks that also include people, right? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
let's just be real. You have a whole chapter. It's called "Don't Lose Days to Rotten People." Tell me more.
right. So, that is both time and, I like to think, spirit.
Mhm.
It's just the idea that our lives are filled with people who are not helpful or healthy
Yeah.
to us. Now, sometimes we're related to them and we might not be able to eliminate them from our lives entirely. And that's a shame, but true.
Mm.
And sometimes they live next door to you and you kind of can't get rid of them because their house is within proximity of yours. But if you can find ways to ensure that those people aren't taking from you, both in a spiritual way, like in a way that isn't making you feel good about the world and yourself, and
Yeah.
moving you forward in productive ways, and then maybe just limiting the amount of time you actually have to interact with those people in really strategic ways, it's going to make your life so much better. We
Mhm.
don't deserve to have our time taken by people who are unwilling to be supportive and encouraging to us. So we have to find those people, fill the spaces with those people, and get rid of the ones that aren't that good for us.
I mean, that just speaks to boundaries again. You know, we hear about it, and I think it takes baby steps to set those. Again, repetition. You build confidence over time once you become a very good communicator, and can communicate with your outside voice what your boundaries are and aren't, right?
Yeah, and understanding that, this requires sometimes a hard conversation,
Mm,
but you can have a hard 10-minute conversation and then 20 years of bliss without that person in your life, or with them understanding how they need to modify their behavior. So it's like the return on investment with a hard conversation is enormous. Waiting to have that hard conversation or never having it at all means 20 minutes of this nagging, negative, time sucking, soul sucking person will continue to be with me forever and ever until I do something about it. So
yes.
be daring, have that hard conversation, and tell them you need to either exit my life or reform the way you are operating within my life, because it's not working for the way I need to be right now.
And again, we're talking about fear. So most people I find don't have the hard conversations because it's too scary. They're afraid of what the backlash is going to be, what the response and rebuttal is going to be. So they just let it slide, right? And it
Yeah.
gets worse and worse and worse, or worse. Maybe somebody ghosts you completely, and then you're like, "What the hell?" Do you know, just a simple text message would have been more than sufficient. I think we overcomplicate these things. Communication is two ways and open. You can see I'm getting very passionate about this.
Yes, I can see that this is a personal issue for you.
Yeah, asking for a friend.
Uh-huh.
So let's change gears then. People are out there listening. They want to leap into something new. They want to start something exciting. They've had it in their mind forever, and it's a dream that they can't seem to shake, right? So a lot of times you just hear in the world that, you have to really be good at saying no. Say no to this, say no to that. Discern, 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 which is important. But you talk about the importance of saying yes more. Why is that a considered idea?
Yeah, I don't like say no at all. I'm
Mm,
not a fan of that advice. I tell people to say yes because I think in life we are afforded opportunities. Either someone asks us to do something or we see something, an opportunity, potential in some way. Essentially, it's a door. We're given doors in our lives, and
mhm.
they're ajar to a certain degree. Sometimes someone throws it open. Sometimes we see a crack. Whatever it is, I think we say yes to every single thing because it allows us to walk through that door and see what's on the other side. Take stock in what this opportunity means, because a yes can always be converted to a no. You can say yes to an opportunity, try it out, and then say, you know what, it wasn't for me. But oftentimes, if we say no to an opportunity, it doesn't come back around. And so we've missed out on what could be wonderful for us. The idea that we have any perception over what will be good for us and what we will be enjoy is enormous hubris. So much of my life is doing things that I didn't think I would like and then became an enormous part of my life that I absolutely adore. Starting with, frankly, golf, which is a sport I thought was ridiculous and elitist and stupid and is now my favorite thing to do, all the way to things like becoming a wedding DJ. You know, the day my best friend said, do you want to be a wedding DJ? I thought, no. I've only attended 2 weddings in my life. I don't really know music that well. It's a terrible idea. But I said yes, knowing the yes could be a no eventually as I looked into it, but knowing that no one else was ever going to ask me to be a wedding DJ again. This was when my one shot of doing this. 25 years later, I am still a wedding DJ. And although that career was fine, it led to my ability to public speak in front of enormous groups of audiences. It led to my best friend in the world today who attends Patriots games to me. And that's just like 2 of a million benefits that have come from that. Yes, that ridiculous, unwanted yes. We cannot assume we know what we want or what is good for us. We have to say yes to everything and then understand that yes, if it's not good, we can close that door and we can say we looked through the door. We don't like what's behind the door, but we gave it a chance. Everything should be a yes.
Yes, you open the door, you say thank you if it's not a match, and close it back up. So fun fact, I used to be a wedding DJ as well.
Oh. And was that your idea or was someone asking you to do it?
Oh yeah, it was completely random. But then again, I was a radio DJ first. It was a natural 1-2 step, but it wasn't something that I thought was like my dream job at the moment. Right. But actually, it was quite fun. I enjoyed that year. That was great.
Oh, some of my fondest memories come from being a wedding DJ, and then truly from going to Patriot games with my former client turned friend. And it's just when I hear people tell me, like, that's not for me, I think you haven't tried it yet. It's like my kids when they won't try food. You know, I've got these 2 terrible children who won't try anything that isn't like white and soft, you know. If it's not bread or cheese, they don't want to eat it. And I know in my heart, and they will know someday, how stupid they are to not try these new foods and give them honest chances. Yet that's how people treat their lives all the time. They treat their lives like broccoli. I'm not going to like that because it looks weird and it smells funny, and I'm sure I won't like the taste. The hubris involved in that belief is outrageous, and it just deprives people from having interesting lives.
Well, and I mean, to that point exactly, I feel like I spoke to a doctor on the podcast one time that said that every single cell in your body becomes completely different and new every 7 years. So your physical whole body is completely different every 7 years. So how can you assume that what you didn't like 8 years ago is still something you don't like, as in food or, you know, a hobby or, you know, adventure or whatever?
Right.
Now, right?
Just think about what you were like at 18 and then 28, and then depending how old you are, 38. Like you were an entirely different person at 18 compared to who you are today. And what you loved at 18 is definitely not what you love today. And that is continuing to be the case for you if you're willing to open those doors and say yes to the craziness.
And to your point, I think when I have said yes to unexpected opportunities that have come along in my life, you know, what happens, even granted, I am an extrovert, but I'm building more community. I'm building more network. And that, as I learn, as I get older, is how other doors, bigger, beautiful, more aligned doors start to make their way to me. It's just because my network of incredible people I know around the world has grown and grown and grown. Can't do that by sitting on the couch watching live streaming videos, right?
No, you can't. And you do have to always remember that there will come a day when there are fewer doors in your life to open. You know, it's just inevitable that as we get older, there's going to probably be fewer opportunities for us. And we will look back. You know, if you speak to hospice workers and they talk about what people in their final days often talk about, it's regret. And so often it's regret about missed opportunities and an unwillingness to take a risk. And that essentially is the unwillingness to step through a frightening door or a weird door or a crazy door or something that we never imagined for ourselves. And I am really deeply obsessed with helping people live a life where at the end they're not feeling that awful feeling that I understand all too well.
Well, it's funny enough. I mean, I literally have this quote sitting on my desk right now. It's from Martin Luther King Jr. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. And I think that's it. Like, you know, we don't say yes because we're like, oh, I can't see all the way down the staircase, so I don't know where that's headed. Ooh, I know where I am now. This feels safe. Let's just stay here, right?
Yeah.
Nonsense.
And I think the darker the staircase, the more it should draw you. You know, I always believe in sort of the best way to find new opportunities of meaning is to find the things that frighten you the most and run to those things as fast as you can. And whatever that thing is, whether it's baking a cake for your child's birthday with the fear that you're going to ruin that cake, or for me right now, it's stand-up comedy. I'm not doing stand-up because I'm terrified of it. And that is why I began doing stand-up, because I recognized I was terrified of it and therefore I must do it. So whatever frightens you, you know, unless it's, you know, wrestling alligators, you know, and even then I think people do that. I don't recommend it, but whatever frightens you is probably the challenge that you should be seeking next.
And so shift gears a little. Let's talk about the spotlight effect, which is something you bring up in your book. Why might that be a roadblock keeping us from trying something new?
So the spotlight effect is this principle that social scientists have discovered wherein we believe people are paying more attention to us than they actually are, right? Because we are the protagonist of our lives, we're the central figure in our life, we tend to believe that we are also a significant figure in other people's lives too, when it's simply not the case. They do these great experiments where they'll have a classroom with 50 people in it, and they'll have one student walk in with a neon yellow shirt with a ridiculous phrase printed on it, and they'll have that person sit in the middle of the class for the full hour, and then after the class, they'll ask the kid who they made wear the yellow shirt, how many people do you think noticed the shirt? And, you know, the kid will say half or 3/4. And then they'll ask all the people who were in the class, did you see the kid in the yellow shirt? And almost no one did. It's this weird belief that we have. It makes sense because we are the main character of our story, that we believe we're the main character of everybody's story, when it's simply not true. Now, in a small way, that allows us to do things like leave the house with a wrinkled shirt rather than spending the time ironing it and being late for wherever we're going, right? Or, you know, I used an example in the book where one of my friends saw me in the grocery store looking terrible because I had just been at the gym and I was sort of sweaty and gross and now grocery shopping. And my friend said, I could never be in the grocery store looking like this. And I said, nobody will remember what I look like. In fact, even though you noticed me a week from now, you won't remember it. Even when people notice the way you look, they don't remember the way you looked. And if you doubt that, just remember to the last holiday. Remember to the last Christmas or Hanukkah you celebrated. Do you remember what you or anyone else at that party was wearing in any way whatsoever? We don't. We just don't remember because we're not paying attention. So in a small way, it can be time saving. But in a big way, it can help us do things like make terrible things, right? It's the idea that I can write a terrible thing and put it out into the world, and people might read it and go, it's not so good. And then they just move on. They don't like think about it. They're not tossing and turning at night about it. It is gone already out of their minds because the spotlight effect is the idea that we think people are thinking about us and looking at us, and they're not. And so we can move through life with a little more impunity. We can move through life with a little less concern about the opinions and thoughts and perceptions of others.
And isn't that liberating? I mean,
it's so liberating. It's just the best.
It is. And, you know, I'm 44 at the time of this recording, and I've heard for decades, you know, that people in their 40s, we start to just give 0 Fs, you know, and just like, ugh. And I'm like, how and why when I was in my 30s? Like, I can't even imagine. But now that I'm 44, like this whole concept is coming up more and more in my life. And I go, well, what if? What if I did care less or think that no one is paying attention and I can just move through the world how I want to move through the world, what lights me up inside, do the work that excites me? Man, it's so liberating.
Yeah, you can shed all of those concerns that you once had that, plagued your mind and
Yeah.
also just stole away from your time. There's another great research study that showed that people who think they're having a good hair day, they would quiz all the people they encountered asking, did you notice anyone having a good hair day today? No one ever notices your good hair day except for you. Now, if it makes you feel good to go, I'm having a good hair day, and it boosts your spirit, that's great. But if you think other people are noticing your good hair day, they are not. And even if they happen to notice it, they will not remember it the next day. So forget all of those things and just be the person you want to be instead of the person you think people want you to be.
Yeah.
It's just the best way to be.
Yes, and that points back to what the whole premise of the book is, like propelling yourself into your creative life, leaping into something new, whatever that creative endeavor is. Imagine once you get into it and you really, wrestle with it in the first and you stumble and you make the horrible first drafts or the first 10,000 drafts. And then you get to a place where you're making things that are in good rhythm and you're in flow and your spirit is lit up. It's win-win and a win for the world eventually too, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's a wonderful feeling to know that you've reached a place that you wanted to be. I always tell people you have to have a point on the horizon that you're aiming at. And if you're lucky, you never get there. If you're lucky, it might shift. That horizon point might shift depending on what you're seeking on a certain day. But, you never want to sort of get there, but you do want to be heading in a direction. And when you get to some closer point and you say to yourself, I wanted to do a thing, and I accumulated a whole bunch of small decisions and strategies and work days and hard effort and sweat and tears. And now I got to that place. Mm-hmm. That's just extraordinary. And it's a glorious feeling to know that you've done something that you've always wanted to do.
And I think you and I are so aligned in this part because that's really at the core and the ethos of what we do and what we teach over here at the Simplifiers is that what you realize is that you need a hell of a lot less than you thought in your life. Maybe in your early 20s, you're going after the corner office and the mega mansion and the this and the that. And then maybe the 1% gets there and they go, man, I got a pool guy I got to pay, a lawn guy I got to pay, a housekeeper, a house manager, a lifestyle manager, a social media man, like all the nonsense. And you go, wait a second, what was the most important thing that I was chasing after, striving for? And start to simplify down, distill down to the very best and do it. That's the secret.
Yeah. And even if you are still fixated on that corner office for whatever reason you might be, I always tell people you have to celebrate every step along the way. Mm-hmm. I meet authors who say, well, I'm going to celebrate or have a party when I'm on the bestseller list. And I think, well, that sounds pretty foolish to me. I think if you write a book, you should have a party. Yeah. If I finish a chapter, like I get up and drink a Diet Coke and go for a bike ride because I deserve to enjoy myself for a moment because I finished a chapter. It's small steps along the way, small decisions in our lives will accumulate into something that we find meaningful, but we have to find those steps meaningful as well. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I think what happens is we eventually stop making them. Yeah. If we're not celebrating our steps along the way, eventually it starts to feel meaningless to us. So we have to love ourselves and what we're doing, despite the fact that we haven't gotten to that ultimate goal that we hoped to achieve one day.
Yeah. And what I hear in that is the celebration in the micro moments along the way. Because let's be frank, I've set some pretty big goals in my life. And then it's as the journey went on, I'm like, I don't really want that. So I'm going to deviate this way. So you may never actually get to whatever that big beacon is in the horizon ever. So if you're living a life of if-then statements, you're bypassing the journey and the celebration along the way, right?
Yeah. And that's why I always say your horizon endpoint can change, and that's perfectly okay. You used to want to be a this, but you want to be a that now. But the thing you should always have in your mind is a distant point that you're working towards. And that can be, I want my marriage to be better. That can be, I want my relationship with my father to be better. Or it can be, I want to build a church with my own hands. And that distant point is going to be perhaps even further away, but you've got to have something you're chasing. the dog that catches the rabbit when they used to do greyhound racing, that was a terrible thing because that dog stopped running because it realized the rabbit's not real. You never want to set goals so short that you can actually reach them. I'm a big believer in setting very high goals and failing frequently. That is one of my favorite things to do because I know that I've at least strived further than I could have.
So if all of this stuff has perked your ears up and you're like, well, you know what? Maybe Matthew's on to something. I highly recommend checking out this book. It's called Someday is Today, 22 Simple, Actionable Ways to Propel Your Creative Life. And it's at bookstores all over the world, down the street, your local bookshop, or wherever you find books online. And Matthew, I just want to ask you a few questions as we wrap up that I ask everyone that comes on the podcast. And again, thank you so much. I feel like this is the kick in the pants that I think a lot of us kind of needed today.
Well, I'm glad to help.
That's it. Like, you have your spiritual gift. You are doing it. Well done, you.
Thank you.
So on that, here's my questions, rapid fire. Okay. Tell us one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system.
I think it's doing both. Right now, I'm reading William Goldman's Adventures in the Screen Trade. It's written in 1982, which is really interesting because you get to hear his view of what the movies were like in 82 and make predictions. But if you want to write, it's a wonderful example of how to write. And it's a screenplay, but really it's a story. And it's been enlightening, but there have been moments where he tricks me and he says, do you think this is a good idea? And I, in my mind, say, yes, it is. And he goes, no, it's not. And he explains to me why I was wrong. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. It's an old book, but it's a great book that I have suddenly uncovered and I'm enjoying a lot.
Love it. Well, we'll link that up in the show notes for people if you guys want to check that out. Again, the simplifierspodcast.com. So tell me, who's one person in your network, somebody that you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things? We could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast.
So her name is Jenny Bonaldo. She's actually referenced several times in Someday is Today. I sort of make fun of her quite a bit throughout the book. She's a friend of mine. She's just finished her first novel. I read it. And I don't say nice things about writing unless it's true. It's a wonderfully written novel. She's also a moth storyteller. So she stands on stages in New York, Boston, here in Connecticut, and tells personal stories about really challenging topics like, her struggles with eating disorders and her struggles with parenting. Her husband fought in Iraq for a period of time, and that was challenging for them. But she's one of these people. She's an English teacher and she's a mom. And so I see her creativity as, something that I wish had more space and more opportunity. And so anytime I can champion the things that she's doing, I always do.
I love it. We will link her in the show notes. If you guys are curious about what Jenny's doing, you can go over there as well. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
I guess today I am grateful for probably my wife more than anyone in the world. She is the kind of person that always makes sure that I feel okay about doing the things I need to do to chase my dreams. And so often I have friends who are bartering and negotiating, and sort of I have to wait for the right time to ask my spouse to do this thing. And my wife and I have always believed that we have to be fully supportive of each other creatively and in every way whatsoever, absent guilt or, absent any kind of horse trading for time. And that has been an enormous benefit for me. So her partnership, our equal partnership in this creative life of ours, has been enormously helpful to me.
Huzzah. I think that's what we all aim for in relationships, is a equal running partner in life where you each support and celebrate each other in accomplishing what it is you really want to create in the world. Well done. Wow. So you can find Matthew's work online, MatthewDix.com, and you're on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Is there one place you hang out most if people connect with you?
Well, if you want to see me in my best sorts, you'll see me on Instagram. And if you want to see me in my cantankerous sorts, you'll find me on Twitter.
Okay, perfect. And again, the book is out now, so you guys can check that out. So Matthew, my final question for you today is this, and just take a moment to acknowledge you. Thank you so much for writing this book. I think this is really going to make an impact in the world for so many people. And again, when people get up and out of their comfort zone and make something great, this is how we make positive change in the world. So thank you for writing this.
Thank you.
Someone somewhere is listening to this and listening to you and I right now, and they are on the verge of taking a massive leap. What's one thing you could whisper into their ear right now just to encourage them in this moment?
I want people to remember that I think the struggle so many people have in their life is not making bad decisions, but not making any decisions. I think most people live lives like water down a mountain, finding the path of least resistance. And so if you're thinking about doing something small or enormous, don't be afraid to make bad decisions along the way. The only tragedy truly will be if you make no decision and you remain complacent and you just allow people or the universe or the forces around you to sort of dictate the path that you're on. Don't be afraid to blunder your whole way down the mountain if it's your choice each step of the way.
Hell yeah, it's time to do the thing. Thank you, Matthew, so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.